Good morning. My name's Candice Spence. I'm GM of Marketing at the AFA, and I'm really delighted to introduce you to today's really important webinar, All Your Retirement Living Questions Answered, brought to you in partnership with AVO. Today, you're going to hear from three experts in the area of retirement who will explore important aspects of the industry and what your clients should be considering as they prepare their retirement strategy. Now, the three experts, we've got Rachel Lane. Rachel's got over 20 years experience in financial services sector. She's been specialising in retirement and aged care for more than a decade. And she is currently the principal of Aged Care Gurus, overseeing a national network of advisors dedicated to providing quality advice on retirement living and aged care. Joining Rachel is Danielle Lim. Danielle is a highly experienced lawyer and the principal of DSL Law, a boutique law firm based on Queensland's Gold Coast. Specialising in dispute resolution, Danielle and her firm have built a reputation in providing expert retirement living advice to operators and residents. I beg your pardon. And our third speaker is Marilyn Graham. Marilyn is an experienced professional with over 20 years experience in real estate and property development. Marilyn has worked with some of Brisbane's largest property developers, assisting them with marketing and sales strategies to sell off the plan residential apartments. Now, look, before we begin, I'd just like to cover off some quick webinar housekeeping. Today's webinar will be worth 1 CPD point or hour available, and we'll send out the details within the next week. We'll also answer your questions at the end of this presentation, so please use the Zoom Q&A feature, not the chat feature, as you can see in the diagram on the slide. So let's get started, and welcome Rachel, Danielle and Marilyn, and thanks for putting this important information together to help our members. Over to you.
Thanks, Candice. Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name's Marilyn. I'm the National Sales Innovation Manager at AVO, and I'll also be your MC for today's webinar. For those of you who might not know, AVO is Australia's leading retirement living provider, and we currently have over 12,000 senior Australians living in over 90 communities across the country. We have over 30 years experience in delivering high quality retirement communities for senior Australians. Today, we want you to be able to walk away with a greater understanding of the retirement living category and be armed with the information you need to help your clients maintain their lifestyle into the future. To do so, I'm joined by my category experts, Rachel and Danielle, to give you some real insight into retirement living and some of the key information you need to know. Candice has already covered off on their credentials, so I won't continue with that, but we're looking for you to discover some answers to the key questions that are asked about our category, and we hope that we're able to give you some real insight that assists you in pointing your clients in the right direction when it comes to retirement living and aged care. So the first question we generally get asked is, what is the value proposition of a retirement community and what do they offer? Danielle?
Well, thanks, Marilyn. I actually don't think there is one clear answer to this. I think what a retirement community offers is as varied as the number of retirement communities out there. I suppose one way to look at this question would be to say, well, why do people look for this sort of change? And anecdotally, what I get told by clients is they're looking for some kind of company, social support. It might be that they're looking for a village that provides them with care or the ability to remain independent. The list goes on and on. I think one interesting point about this, though, that I always try and make is people often move for one reason, but then find they enjoy the village for an entirely different reason. So they might move for the happy hour, but find out that they've got a passion for whatever it might be that's offered at the village. I don't know, Rachel, is that similar to your experience?
Yeah, spot on. It's not like other property transactions. You know, you can't sort of apply the usual adage of location, location, location. It's no one ever, and likewise, it's not just about price, because no one ever moved into a retirement village and said, look, I felt like a square peg in a round hole. I didn't enjoy the activities that were on offer, but it was affordable, so I loved it. It's not like that. It's really about finding a community that you want to be a part of. And I always say to people, you've got to find a retirement village with the right vibe and the right tribe, i.e. you want to walk in there and go, yeah, this is a bit of me. I want to live here. I want to jump into the happy hour. I want to do the activities. And then these are people who share similar life experiences to me, similar care needs. If you're looking at retirement villages delivering care, whatever it is that you're looking for, it's really important to find the vibe and the tribe.
Absolutely. I'll second both of those comments. So if we move through, Danielle, you're involved in the Retirement Living Council as an industry body. Can you briefly run us through the latest findings of the industry in Australia?
Yeah, sure. I suppose this audience in particular would appreciate that it is all about the numbers, and fortunately in the retirement living sector we have the numbers. So every year PwC and the Property Council join forces, and what they produce is what you could describe as the most comprehensive aggregated data source about retirement villages in Australia. And they survey everything. So physical characteristics of a village, tenure, structure, health, future development. What you can see on this slide, I think, is the snapshot of some really high level summary results. It gives you a good flavour. There's probably nothing that's going to knock you out there. I think one of the big changes from this data to the previous years would be that bottom figure, which is about couples. So you can see that 42% of all surveyed occupants were couples, whereas the year before it was closer to the 32% mark. So that's a big change. I think we typically see and expect there to be a lot of singles living in villages. Another thing that you see there is that the average age of residents entering villages is 75, and that's remained constant. And interestingly, the average stay at a village is 8 to 9 years. So if we extrapolate that data, I'm guessing that'd be 83 to 84 by the time they're leaving. And you can see here that the average age of an actual occupant is currently 81. So there's some clear space before everyone's going to leave. That's some good news.
All right. So let's get into the nuts and bolts about how does the financial model of a retirement village work. So I'm going to throw to you, Danielle, to cover off on Rachel's terminology here on ingoing, ongoing and outgoing.
Yeah. So the cost that people need to be aware of when they're looking at a retirement village is usually considered in a chronological fashion that Rachel and Aged Care Gurus describe as ingoing, ongoing, outgoing. It means when they move in, while they're living there, and when they leave. And if I can describe this in a really simplistic way, a resident makes an entry payment, let's call that a purchase price when they move in. When they leave, they get that back minus an exit fee. And the exit fee is usually a percentage of what they paid to move in. And while they're there, they pay some costs for ongoing fees and running the village at on a cost recovery basis. So it does sound incredibly simple, I agree. And I just don't want to give the wrong message, because it can be incredibly nuanced, and we're seeing all sorts of variations related to entry payments, capital gain sharing, and the exit fee. So at the moment, I see that vary between anything from 10% to 45%. And I have seen isolated outliers where there's 0% exit fee or 100% exit fee. So I suppose when you're looking at it, it needs to be a user, I suppose, a case-by-case example. So on that exit fee, I think it might be useful for the audience to understand the origin story of it. So at the beginning of the retirement village sector, there just wasn't that level of choice or nuance. You could say with absolute certainty that an exit fee was pretty much going to be about a third of your ingoing contribution. And that was born out of the concept that retirees would sell their family home and apply 2/3 to the purchase price, with the remaining 1/3 payable when they leave as an exit fee. And the main benefit being they actually have a third in their pocket to enjoy their retirement. And I'm guessing that a third of a family home would really pay for a lot of cruises. So interestingly, I'm looking at this slide at the moment, and you can see that The average 2-bedroom ILU in Sydney is around 35% of the average price in Sydney. So there's some good value there. But conversely, South Australia and Western Australia look like they're now pretty close to parity with suburban homes, and that trend is increasing. But overall, in Australia, we're still looking at around the 2/3 price. Just as a general observation, in new developments, it's not uncommon to see penthouses, sub-penthouses, and even just really beautiful units with 7-figure purchase prices. It's just more and more common.
So when we talk about coming in, Daniel, one of the biggest confusion points I've seen with customers can be the different contractual timings that are implemented either by legislation, by the operator, or by the customers themselves. So I just wanted to get some clarity on how that might work for people.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at this point, I think it's probably appropriate to take a step back and understand that what we're dealing with. We're dealing with retirement villages that are regulated on a state-based system. So what that means is that if you've got a village in Sydney, it's going to be subject to entirely different rules to a village in Victoria or Western Australia or Queensland. So state-based separate rules. But there are some similarities, definitely. So for a start, all of the legislation is very conveniently named the same thing, that all the Retirement Villages Act, which is very useful for me who practices nationally. And each act has its own quirks, but the consistencies, I suppose I can summarise them in 2 words: consumer protection. So you will, by and large, see something like a disclosure period, so a period within which a resident has to have all the information made available to them and can't sign. And that, I think, is really important for this audience, because that's the time that your clients should be coming to you as a financial advisor saying, tell me, what is this? And they've got no pressure to sign. The operator cannot put pressure on them to sign during that time. And then after the contract's signed or otherwise becomes unconditional, there's a cooling off period. So a period of time where they can say, actually, I'd like to cool off without penalty. This slide has other notes like new developments. So retirement villages are typically, you can't achieve a binding pre-sale, and that's pretty useful. So if you compare it to a suburban purchase of a unit in a new Metricon tower, for example, you might be paying a similar price, and you might be waiting a similar time for completion, but a lot can happen in, a 2-year build, particularly if you're an older Australian. If you're buying off the plan in a retirement village, you've got the comfort of knowing you're not bound to it. Your estate won't be bound to that contract. The same can't always be said for different types of accommodation.
And I think it's really important, Danielle, to understand the difference between, say, if you're looking at the contractual terms, that retirement villages actually, the contract lasts the lifetime of the tenancy as opposed to residential. So it dictates, what's going to happen when they move in, while they live there, and what happens when they leave. So there's a lot of information for people to absorb and understand, and particularly, obviously, the financial impacts for the whole stay as opposed to just when they're coming in. So let's talk about while they're living in the village and revisit the ongoing costs. There's in some more detail, and how that might sort of compare to what they need to consider as the cost of staying at home. And that's you again, Danielle.
Oh yeah, sure. So sorry. So I suppose with this one, I think the most important thing to remember about ongoing costs, to use Rachel's terminology, is that operators, they just can't profit from them. They are cost recovery, and residents are entitled to ask questions, they're entitled to seek evidence, and they're entitled to generally feel comfortable about what the operator is spending their money on, because it is their money. The second most important thing to know is, I think, the way that these fees can increase is severely limited by the state-based legislation we talked about before, so by the Retirement Villages Act. Generally, these fees can only increase by CPI or other certain limited exceptions, like, to give you an example, if the local government rates go up. Any other increase, that requires the approval of the residents. So what the actual costs are, they will vary dramatically between village and other villages, depending on a number of factors. So the age of the village, the construction, the facilities. To give you an example, a 20-story luxury apartment village in Melbourne with gyms and magnesium pools will cost a whole lot more to run than a single level facility in, you know, suburban or rural Queensland. I've been to several presentations that Rachel Lane has given, and one of the key learnings I always come away with is when you're talking about money, and I'm not giving advice, you need to make sure you're comparing like with like. And I just don't think, Rachel will probably have something to say about this, but I just don't think it could be more true when you look at general services. So the answer is typically what's in the contract. And this is, and I know I'm biased, but this is when I would say get good legal advice, because the lawyers can tell you what is included. If something is particularly important to you and a salesperson says, oh yeah, we might have that in the future, or to your client, it's not enough unless it's in the contract. So I would be saying to clients and future residents, get advice, get good advice, and understand what's actually included in your fees so you can compare like with like.
Thanks for that. Let's we'll go on now to everyone's favourite topic, which is the management fee, otherwise referred to as sometimes a deferred management fee or an exit fee. So what does it actually pay for?
Is it me?
That's you. Yep.
Excellent. So I think the exit fee it's always the elephant in the room for some reason, and I just don't think we as an industry should ever shy away from the fact that there is an exit fee. We should be loud and proud about it. This is what it is. When somebody leaves a village, they have to pay a fee. What that fee pays for depends on the operator. So it is the only profit component that you will see. Although we are getting a little bit more creative with different sorts of fees. It's often described by, I hear operators say that it will be applied to the ongoing improvement, to capital items, to profit, to whatever else. But you can view it as an operator's source of profit. Sorry, I shouldn't say the only source of profit. Obviously, capital gain needs to be taken into account too as a pretty significant factor. So I think this slide shows that by year 6 of a resident's tenure, about 59% of all resident contracts will have the DMF accrued in full. Anecdotally, I think that most new builds have an accrual period of 2 years, but there are still some operators who are giving 10-year accrual periods. And by that, I mean that there's a percentage accruing every year. So if you leave earlier, you don't pay the full amount. That second chart clearly shows that the overwhelming majority of DMFs in the industry are in the 30s, with 53% having a maximum DMF of at least 30%.
Great. So let's just throw to what some operators might be doing differently when they're looking to talk about the management fee in a more general sense. So I might throw this one to Rachel.
Thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, I guess it's becoming more and more of a trend to have different payment options. And so as Danielle touched on, the deferred management fee is really there to keep that upfront purchase price artificially low and recover that deferment of capital, if you like, at the end, together with the operator's profit. What some operators are realising is that that particular payment model, while it came from the church, charity and not-for-profit sector and was really designed as an affordable housing type model, it isn't necessarily affordable or even attractive to everyone. And that's because there can be certain knock-on effects to having an artificially low purchase price to things like pension entitlement, cash flow, home care package costs, and of course the amount of money that someone's going to get when they leave and how soon after they leave the village, and that then in turn affects potentially what's their cost of residential aged care and how long it can take them to fund that. So Avayo's got 3 contract options which we worked on as part of that team. and which are called now, later, and bond. Later, if you like, is the normal kind of industry standard type payment option where you pay a deferred management fee of 35% after you leave. Now enables you to pay a discounted management fee up front instead of paying it later, and bond enables you to pay a no exit fee option, essentially. So I've run some numbers on what these different contracts look like to put them into a context. So if we could have the next slide. And the next one.
Just keep going. Sorry, Beck. Yeah.
Sorry, Beck. So when it comes to the key financial considerations for your clients who are looking at downsizing into a retirement village, obviously you've got those ingoing, ongoing and outgoing costs together with the client's personal costs. Those things still need to be factored in. The amount they pay and the way in which they pay it to the village can certainly impact on their pension and rent assistance and other government entitlements. It can impact on their home care package costs and their home care package spending. So one of the things that shouldn't be underestimated is the efficiency of home care package delivery in a retirement village setting versus staying at home and getting a home care package. Obviously, you've got your normal financial planning considerations around cash flow, net wealth position, the future cost of residential aged care. A key component of the financial considerations is to look at that buyback timeframe, which Danielle touched on. The legislation may require that there is a buyback, but then sometimes the operators are offering a buyback in an even shorter period of time. So there's a growing competition in the market around buyback timeframes, and some of those timeframes, for example, in Victoria, you have to meet a certain set of rules to be entitled to a buyback from the operator. And yet you may find operators like Aveo who will give you a buyback in as short a period of time as 3 months. Or you may have a buyback timeframe in Queensland of 18 months, but the contract that you're signing will give you that buyback in 6 months. So that's certainly part of the consideration, and obviously estate planning. So sometimes clients have estate planning that leaves their current home to a specified beneficiary. Obviously, if that home's being sold to fund a retirement village purchase, and in fact, anyone moving into a retirement village needs to revisit their estate planning wishes. So if we have a look at a couple of quick case studies, these will just sort of highlight some of the considerations financially speaking. So this is Jill, and she's going to sell her house for $900,000 after she's paid costs. She's got about $150,000 in the bank and some personal assets, and she's already receiving a level 2 home care package, and she wants to move into an Aveo community. I haven't specified the community because there's a number of Aveo communities right across the country with these sorts of price points. So the 3 payment options that Aveo will give to Jill would be a $600,000 purchase price with the deferred management fee of 35% and a 6-month buyback, a $720,000 purchase price for the now contract. So essentially what's happening is she's paying her management fee up front. So instead of paying 35% later, she's paying 15% now, and she's still getting that 6-month buyback timeframe. Or the bond contract where she pays $780,000 for her unit. There is no exit fee on that. There is an establishment fee of 3%, and she gets a 3-month buyback. So they're the 3 payment options. Let's see what they look like for Jill. So first of all, let's look at her pension impact. And it's really important to model these things for customers because clients can make all sorts of really funny rules of thumb assumption about what it means to move into a retirement village. So sometimes they'll use a rule of thumb, well, as long as I'm selling my house for more than I pay to the retirement village, I can afford it. Or in the case of different payment options, I should go for the one with the cheapest purchase price. And that's just not necessarily the right decision to make. They really need to crunch the numbers and look at what those numbers mean for them. So you can see at the moment she gets the full pension Under the later contract, her pension would be roughly halved. And that's not uncommon. And that's because of that affordable housing model, i.e. the true purchase price isn't being paid up front. You're only paying, as Danielle said, 2/3 of it now and 1/3 of it later. But because of that artificially low purchase price, that purchase price, provided it's more than $224,500, that purchase price is an exempt asset for her pension. So not paying the true price is actually causing a reduction in her pension along the way. The now contract gets her some more pension, and the bond contract gives her the equivalent of what she's getting at home, i.e. the full pension. If we look at what that means in terms of her cost of care, and this is not uncommon for people who are receiving some pension, it doesn't impact on her basic daily fee, i.e. she's not paying an income tested care fee under any of these scenarios. If there was a scenario where she lost her pension entirely, then you would expect to see the income tested care fee kick in. But what's actually happening is her pension is reducing at such an accelerated rate because of the asset test. So because the asset test reduces her pension by $7,800 a year for each $100,000 of assets, she's actually not able to earn enough income to replace that lost pension, and therefore the income tested care fee is not kicking in. This kind of gives you an idea of what a home care package at a level 2 might look like. It's really important to understand that the basic daily fee can be negotiated. So while we've put in there the maximum basic daily fee, if that was going to cause financial pressure to Jill, you may be able to negotiate with the home care package provider to either reduce or waive that fee. If you do that, then that amount of funding doesn't go into her package. The other thing to make sure that you're aware of is that with home care package funds, you can't allocate the entire amount to care, i.e. there will be an amount that is necessary for administration fees, case management fees, and all of those sorts of things. So make sure that you make an allowance. That fee can be as low as about, I think the cheapest I've seen is about 12%, and that fee can be as high as, the most I've seen is 52%. So make sure that when you're looking at the client's home care package, that you're not allocating or not expecting them to be allocate all of those funds. If we look at the next slide, we'll be able to see what the impact is on her cash flow. So not uncommon for a lot of clients at the moment that she's got a negative cash flow. That's largely as a result of very low interest rates. And we haven't added any strategies or any financial products into this. This is really a, if you like, a do nothing scenario. So you can see there that under the home, her current situation and the bond contract, her cash flow is the same. You can see under the later contract, which is where she pays the exit fee, that her cash flow really cops a hit. And that's simply because of that pension asset test really reducing her pension quite severely. And her, even though she has that money in the bank, what the bank can earn is simply not able to keep pace with the reduction in her pension entitlement. If we move on to her wealth position, you can see that there are differences to her wealth position, and obviously after 5 years you're getting the full effect of the deferred management fee feeding through into that. Next slide. So if we look at Margaret and Bob, I think one of the things that I guess because traditionally retirement villages have very much been affordable, as Danielle said, we are seeing retirement village apartments, and I guess apartments isn't the right word, penthouses, have purchase prices in the millions. We saw one sell a couple of weeks ago for $5 million or just under. So it is not uncommon to see really luxury housing in this retirement village sector, and it's not uncommon to see those as high-rise apartments, and they really are quite impressive. So I do encourage you to get out and have a look at them. They might kind of defy what you think of a retirement village. I think we all have that visual image of the little houses or the little duplexes side by side, you know, rolling hills and all of that. But retirement villages now are quite different in terms of their built form. So anyway, Margaret and Bob are selling their house for $2 million. They've got $300,000 in their investments and $50,000 worth of personal assets. The options that they've got at this particular village at Aveo is they could buy the apartment on a later contract at 1.5. The terms are the same, so 35% deferred management fee, 6-month buyback. They can buy it on the now contract at 1.725. That 15% is being paid up front and there's a 6-month buyback, or they can buy it just under $2 million and have no exit fee and a 3-month buyback. So if we look at their pension impact, being a couple, obviously their maximum pension entitlement is much higher than a single. You can see at home and under the bond contract, their pension entitlement is the same. But if they opt for that deferred management fee, that later contract, their pension's really going to be knocked around by, you know, $33,000 a year roughly. The now contract basically sits in between. It's not really to say that they should take the bond contract, because it may be that the best outcome is achieved by taking the now contract and giving them some financial planning strategies to not have these particular outcomes. Like I said, this presentation is very much built around case studies of a do nothing scenario where we're not putting into this financial planning strategies or financial products. That's really for you guys to look at. How could you, reduce the assessable assets? How could you improve the cash flow? How could you improve the net asset position in the future? If we follow this one through, you can see that later contract has a pretty detrimental effect on the cash flow, just as it did for Jill, whereas the bond contract is very much the same as staying at home. And if we look at the net wealth position, so one thing I did want to touch on in relation to this slide, you can see there that the orange line is the current home, and then you've got the black line being the later contract, the green line being the now contract, and the blue line being the bond contract. It's really important to understand that no matter what the contract is with the retirement village, so even if the contract is giving your client some or all of the capital gain, moving into a retirement village should not be about a property investment. Clients should not have an expectation that they're going to move into a retirement village and leave that village with more money than what they put into it. It's just not a realistic expectation. These are very much lifestyle assets. So very much about, similar to buying a boat or buying a vintage car or something like that. They should not have the expectation that this is going to, even if the contract, which Aveo's contracts don't share in the capital gain, but even if they were buying into a village where they did share in some or all of the capital gain, they shouldn't have an expectation that they're going to walk out with more money than what they put in. The other thing I would say about contracts that give customers some or all of the capital gain is you need to look at that and balance that out with the costs that are associated with achieving that capital gain. So generally, if you have a contract where you get some or all of the capital gain, you need to meet some or all of the costs associated with achieving it. So things like renovation costs, marketing fees, sales commissions, there's a whole bunch of expenses that can go with that capital gain that needs to come off at the end. The other thing that you'll typically find with those contracts is that the buyback period is much longer. So it would be very rare to find a contract that gave your client some or all of the capital gain and also gave them a 6-month buyback, because essentially the only way that the capital gain can be achieved is for the property to be sold to somebody else. And so the operator needs as much time as possible to do that. So typically what you would find is those contracts might be subject to, you know, a legislative buyback of 18 months, for example. So if we can go to the next bit. Oh, that must be back to you, Marilyn.
I'm just going to stop for a minute before we go on to what we think is, we're going to crystal ball it for a minute. I just wanted to clarify, probably back to Danielle. So most of what we've talked about today applies obviously to a leasehold or license style contract as opposed to freehold. So I just wondered if you wanted to touch on that just briefly to explain the difference that occurs there.
Yeah, sure. That's a really good point. I think when I have these discussions, I have them on the basis of a leaseholder license, because that is overwhelmingly the most common tenure that we see in retirement living. Data is showing that it's more than 2/3. I actually think it's far higher. It's about 100% of everything I see come through is either leasehold or license. The trend between those two have been moving to license. So what that means is a resident acquires a right to reside, and that right to reside is in the form of the lease or the license. The lease in most states can be registered on title. The license is not registered, but residents have legal protection of the right to be repaid via a statutory charge, which you can see on most titles, certainly in Queensland and New South Wales. With freeholds, they certainly still do exist. Some of them are still trading as freehold villages, but it is the absolute exception. I think it's a very uncomfortable fit. So what happens is the strata legislation and the retirement legislation sit side by side, and there are conflicts. It absolutely complicates things for residents. So rather than just having your retirement village funds, you also have to have all of your strata funds. You have to work out if the common facilities are owned by the body corporate, or are they on a lot owned by the operator, and what's the flow through of that, and what's the liability of residents. And in any event, all of that said and done, it ends up being the same financial outcome by and large, because things like capital gain that Rachel was talking about can be contractually dealt with. So it's just your starting point. So for a freehold, the resident begins being entitled to 100% of that purchase price or the resale price. But what they do in their contract is agree to give some of that back to the operator. So they agree to give the exit fee to the operator, and they agree to give some or all of the capital gain. And that title is typically tied up with caveats and mortgages and leases and subleases. So the complication and the, I suppose, extra cost of compliance, I question the benefit of it. Does that answer your question, or did I just get on my soapbox about
Yeah, no, that answered my question. I just wanted to throw back to Rachel for a minute, because I know we've had these conversations before, and you covered it briefly, but I think sometimes the value of that buyback provision being faster is kind of what's the value of their money over time, or access to those funds, particularly, and I don't want to open up a rabbit hole here, but particularly when they're needing to fund any further care, such as residential aged care. So do you want to just touch on that, like the difference between waiting 18 months and 6 months for your funds to fund those sort of things?
Yeah, look, I'm assuming most people on this call know that if your client subsequently moves into residential aged care, the majority of people in residential aged care need to pay the market price for their accommodation. They can choose to pay that market price by a lump sum, known as a RAD, or refundable accommodation deposit, a daily payment, a daily accommodation payment, literally DAP, or a combination of the two things. For most people, they don't have access to the capital to pay to pay all of that RAD up front, which means they need to pay a DAP at whatever is the prevailing interest rate, which is set by the government. At the moment, it's pretty low, but it has historically been up closer to the 12% mark. So I guess when you're looking at how quickly will you get that repayment, you need to think about, well, if I've got the ability to pay a RAD after 3 months versus after 18 months, you know, that's 15 months worth of interest. What is the saving on that? And that saving can be literally be tens of thousands of dollars. So the other thing is that sometimes it's not about that. It's not about meeting the cost of residential aged care necessarily. Sometimes it's about the fact that clients want their estate settled quickly. They don't want to have to wait 18 months for the buyback to kick in for their estate to be able to be settled. Because at the end of the day, whatever their house is, it is typically the largest asset of their future estate. And so it does become a really important consideration, that buyback timeframe, not just from a financial point of view, but also from an emotional point of view. You know, there are some things that are worth more than money, and not having your family fight for a lot of people is worth more than, you know, whatever they have to trade off to get that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think Danielle and I've probably both experienced that firsthand on a number of occasions. So we're going to throw now to what our thoughts are. So we're going to crystal ball it and ask you both what you think the future of retirement living is going to look like in Australia. And I'll start with you, Danielle.
I think the future is bright. I think without doubt, and this is probably not a surprise coming from the lawyer in the room, but there is going to be more regulation. It's going to cover retirement living nationwide. I do not think that we're going to see harmonisation of laws, though. It'll remain state-based. The other thing I think we'll see is more choice. So when I say more choice, I mean choice of financial models and choice of built form. I think I may have mentioned, or in any event, I saw a village in the US that is literally built around margaritas. I think that there's that sort of spectrum where you can have villages built around particular interests, common goals. Like Rachel said, find your tribe, create a tribe-based village, I say.
Sounds like fun. Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, look, I think change is inevitable, no matter what industry we're talking about, but I definitely think there'll be a lot of change in this particular sector. I think for financial advisors, it's really important, particularly if you're providing aged care advice, it's really important to understand the important role that retirement villages play, and the fact that there's now more people receiving or living in a retirement village than there are receiving residential aged care. So I think, you know, from a market opportunity point of view, it's really important. But I also think that retirement villages, while they used to sort of all be advertised as sort of carefree and people riding bikes, and I'm actually now starting to worry that the next slide's going to be something like that. But you know, I think there's that element that people are realizing, well, hang on a minute, this kind of gives me that opportunity to live independently, do the things that I can and that I want to do for myself, have support and care for the things that I can't or I don't want to do. And I think people are starting to look at retirement villages almost as a preemptive strike against ever having to move into residential aged care in the future. And I think the government sort of plans around this, particularly the fact that they're releasing so many more home care packages. You know, there's some really interesting statistics in terms of about 1.5 million people received aged care services last year, but only about 250,000 of them lived as permanent residents of an aged care facility. So there's so many, I guess, different accommodation and care options that are out there that are available to people, and retirement villages is one, and it's a very obvious one, especially when you think about the economies of scale, the fact that you've got operators who may be quite experienced at delivering care. Yeah, I think that's something definitely worth thinking about, and I definitely think we'll see more of that in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to close it out there and hand back to Candice, but I just want to take the opportunity to thank my presenters, as always, for their expert advice today, and certainly open up to anyone that's attending today to reach out to us personally for any other information or questions you have. But Candice, I'll hand back to you if there's any Q&A from the audience. We don't seem to be getting anything from Candice there, so I don't think that I can access the Q&A at this point. But here she
Hi,
is.
everyone. Apologies, Marilyn. And
That's
look,
all right.
thanks, Marilyn, Rachel and Danielle. That was really informative and such an important topic with our ageing population here in Australia. I particularly like the idea of a Margarita based retirement village. I'm ready to move in. But on another note, look, I'll just let some questions come in. Can I just ask a couple to start with, ladies? One is, look, can you pre-purchase the retirement village and rent it out to someone else until you need it, or do you need to be an owner-occupier? What are the rules there?
Do you want me to take that one, Rach?
Yeah.
So retirement villages are owner-occupier. You will see contractually in every retirement village contract an obligation on the resident to not use the home for commercial purposes, to live in the home, the list goes on. There are a couple of exceptions and comments. One is I question how a rented retirement village would work in and align with the planning rules. I think there might be some uncomfortable fitting there. And the second is the same renting proposition doesn't apply necessarily on the way out. So in New South Wales, for example, there's explicit provisions, and also the ACT, explicit provisions allowing people and estates to rent. And having said all of that, the law is amazing and we can do anything we want. So if somebody wanted to build some kind of investment vehicle, it's where people could rent out, it is possible. I'm just not sure whether it's preferable.
Okay.
And I might just add something to that. If you
Yes.
have a client who's looking for a rental village, it's important to know that sometimes with the different contract options that are out there, you can get rental style option. The reason I call it rental style is because, and I might throw this one back to Danielle, but there's a difference between being a retirement village resident and a tenant. And I would think you would prefer to be a retirement village resident because of all of the security of tenure and things that go around that versus being a tenant. But there are other retirement villages that are just pure rental villages. So I guess if the question was because someone is looking for rental villages, they do exist. And sometimes it might be that the operator is prepared to offer more of a periodic payment type arrangement versus a leasehold where you buy as a lump sum.
Okay, thanks, ladies. Another one. Look, at what states have the buyback legislated at the moment?
I might start with that one. So you'll see a version of the buyback in most states. And when we talk about buyback, that's the time frame that the operator has to repay the resident their exit entitlement. So you'll see it in Queensland, New South Wales, a version in Victoria and ACT. What I would say, though, is that's the legislation. There are a few operators who are going above and beyond the mandatory requirements, and that's where the real gold dust is. So if I think we spoke about the Aveo version and how you can be repaid as early as 90 days. I mean, it's just insane. So I'd be looking more to what operators are providing contractual benefits rather than what states are providing minimum standards.
Yeah.
Anything from you, Rachel or Marilyn, on that? Or
yeah, I completely agree with Danielle. Essentially, I think the legislation provides a minimum. But there are plenty of operators out there that are going above and beyond that, and so probably just don't. I guess what I would say is don't have the expectation that the buyback timeframe that's in the legislation is necessarily the buyback timeframe that's going to apply. Look at what the buyback timeframe is in the contract, because what you don't want to do is create an expectation for the client that they're going to get a buyback in 18 months, when really the buyback being offered is 3 months. Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, look, I don't seem to have any more questions at this stage, but one thing I do want to let everyone know is that, you know, the recording of this presentation will be available on the website, and we'll also be able to share your presentation with your contact details, you know, with our members that attended. Look, is there anything finally that each of you would like to leave the audience with on this topic?
Yeah, I've got something. I'd just love to pick up
Daniel?
on a couple of points that Rachel's made, just I think to reinforce them. So Rachel made the incredibly valid point that this it's important that financial advisors assist in setting expectations about what this type of thing is. It's not a financial investment. You're not going to walk away with more money. I just can't echo that sentiment enough. The amount of conversations that I've had with families and residents where I present an exit entitlement to them and they say, but that's less than we paid, with complete outrage on their face. I can't help but think that disappointment and frustration could have been managed if the legal and financial team around that family at the beginning was firmer in helping to set expectations. So that's point number one. Point number two was a point about, let's talk about the speed with which we're going to finalise an estate. And it's on one of Rachel's slides that succession planning is important. I'm seeing a trend where people, particularly with older wills, are giving a particular family home or a freehold home under their will, which doesn't necessarily apply when they move into a retirement village because it's a different type of asset. So when we give any sort of financial or legal advice, it obviously touches and concerns a really broad range of topics. Succession planning is one of them. It's really important that people understand their will and their assets when they're making this type of move.
And I think, Danielle and Rachel, you'd probably echo this, certainly from an operator's perspective, and when we're talking to the customers within the village, we're definitely encouraging as much as we possibly can that the family is involved or engaged with the conversation and the decision. And I know, you know, certainly from a financial planning point of view and from a legal advice point of view, we also encourage that. So again, when we do get to the point of time when they're exiting and we may be dealing directly with the family, they've got some context around what the contract looked like and what the implications are for the estate, etc. So if wherever we can, we're certainly engaging with that next generation down. I think we've just had one pop in, Candice.
We have, if I can just interject there, look, Josh has asked, look, just to confirm, the final payment is exclusively the profit of the village owner. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what the final payment is, but in real terms, the only thing that gets repaid to the resident is their ingoing contribution, so their purchase price, minus the exit fee and any other fees they've agreed. All other money is dealt with in accordance with the contract and is the operator's. I don't know if I complicated that. I'm sorry.
So the management fee component of any contract is the operator's main source of income. So and that covers everything from their profit through to the management of, you know, corporate governance through to capital improvements, etc. So if that helps, I'm not sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, ladies. Gosh, there's a few complexities in there, and as you've mentioned, the major bit is how do people feel? And I think Danielle's point is, you know, trying to explain it all up front so that they understand, you know, outcomes down the track, etc., can really help, you know, give peace of mind to everybody, I think, and less rows within the family and everyone else. But look, thank you so much, everyone, for today. That's been brilliant. I hope our members have enjoyed it. And again, thanks everyone for attending as well. And Marilyn, Rachel and Daniel, thank you for your time today. And we will be circulating, you know, these slides and also putting it up on the website. So have a great day and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.